The last human, or so it seemed, stood on the edge of a desolate cityscape. The once thriving metropolis, now reduced to rubble and silence, was a grim reminder of Earth's catastrophic downfall. Buildings that once touched the sky were now nothing more than broken skeletons of steel and glass. The air was thick with dust, and a quiet, oppressive darkness seemed to blanket the planet. The last human, Even Walker, was alone. Truly alone. Even had been a soldier, a survivor, someone who had seen the world crumble around him. Years ago, a deadly plague had swept across the earth, wiping out nearly all of humanity. Then came the wars. Humans, in their desperation, had turned on each other, tearing apart the last remnants of civilization. And now, Even was the final living soul, haunted by the memories of a world long gone. He walked through the empty streets of what was once a bustling city. His footsteps echoed loudly, though there was no one to hear them. The buildings, once symbols of human achievement, were now eerily abandoned. The few cars left in the streets were rusting, their engines long since failed. It felt as though the world had forgotten about him, as if he was a ghost wandering through the ruins of a forgotten civilization. For weeks, Evan had searched for anything that could provide answers. He had scoured libraries, computers, and even government facilities, hoping to understand why the world had ended. But there was nothing left. No messages, no clear reason for the fall. All he knew was that somehow, Earth had come to an end, and he was the last person standing. But there was something strange in the air today. It wasn't just the silence or the emptiness. It was as if the earth itself was holding its breath. Even had always trusted his instincts, and now they were screaming at him that something was different. As he walked, he noticed a faint humming sound in the distance. It wasn't loud, but it was there, reverberating through the air, like the buzz of an old machine coming to life. He paused, listening intently. The sound was coming from deep within the earth, beneath the ground. It was a low, almost imperceptible hum that seemed to draw him in. He felt an odd pull toward it, a feeling he couldn't explain. Was it his mind playing tricks on him, or was something real down there? Evan's heart raced as he followed the noise, moving cautiously through the city. The hum grew louder as he ventured deeper into the abandoned streets, away from the familiar ruins, and toward the unknown. His instincts told him that if he followed this strange sound, it would lead him to something important, maybe even to a solution to the endless isolation that had plagued him for so long. The ground beneath his feet trembled slightly as he approached a forgotten facility, hidden beneath layers of dirt and concrete. The entrance was obscured, partially covered by collapsed debris, but Even had been around long enough to recognize a hidden doorway when he saw one. There was a faint, glowing panel on the wall, half buried under rubble, but still visible enough to catch his attention. Without hesitation, he cleared the debris, revealing the entrance. A small door, like a vault, stood before him, almost mocking his curiosity. As he touched the panel, the door slid open with a hiss, releasing a wave of stale, cold air. The hum grew louder, now vibrating through the walls, the ground beneath him. Something inside was alive, something ancient. Even stepped cautiously inside, the dim lights flickering to life as soon as he crossed the threshold. The facility was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was old, yet somehow advanced, like a relic from another age. The walls were lined with strange machines and tubes that hummed with energy, while thick, metallic doors led deeper into the building. A sense of awe washed over him, but so did a deep, unsettling fear. What was this place? Why had it been hidden? He walked down narrow corridors, his footsteps muffled by the thick, dust-covered floors. The air was cool, but there was an underlying warmth to it, as though the building had been dormant for a long time, but was now slowly coming back to life. As he rounded a corner, he entered a massive chamber filled with rows of large, glass-like pods. Inside each one was a figure, humanoid in shape, but different. Their bodies were strange, yet eerily familiar. They looked like humans, but with subtle alterations, enhancements, perhaps. Evan's breath caught in his throat as he realized the truth. These figures, these beings, were not ordinary humans. They were soldiers, super soldiers, humans, but altered, enhanced, and genetically engineered for war. Their bodies were more powerful than any human could be. They were sleeping, waiting, and for the first time, Evan understood why they were here. These soldiers had been created for a purpose, to protect Earth. They were designed to fight against any threat that came, whether external or internal. They were programmed to defend humanity at all costs. But now there was no humanity left to protect. Evan stepped closer to one of the pods, his heart pounding. He could feel the energy surging through the facility, the hum now vibrating through his entire body. He had found them. These super soldiers, who had been dormant for so long, were about to awaken. And their mission would remain the same, to protect Earth. But as Evan stood there, staring at the soldiers in their slumber, he realized something else. He wasn't the last human alive after all. These soldiers were about to rise, and with them, Earth's final line of defense would awaken. But the question was, would they see Evan as an ally or an intruder? And more importantly, would they even recognize that humanity no longer existed? Would they still fight for a world that had long since fallen into ruin? The door slammed shut behind him, and the facility's hum grew to a deafening crescendo. Something was stirring inside. Evan couldn't tell if it was hope or fear that surged through him, but he knew this moment would change everything. The super soldiers were waking up, and Earth would never be the same again. The moment the doors closed behind Evan, a wave of electricity surged through the walls. The facility around him seemed to come alive, as if the very heart of the building was awakening after centuries of slumber. The faint hum that had called him in now turned into a low, almost imperceptible growl that resonated deep within his chest. It was as if the building itself was breathing. Evan's heart raced as he stepped forward, feeling a sense of both awe and fear wash over him. The super soldiers, trapped in their glass pods, seemed so still, so lifeless, yet there was an undeniable presence about them. Their muscular forms, enhanced with advanced technology and genetic modifications, were far beyond anything he had ever seen in his own human world. These beings were not just soldiers, they were creations, perfect, powerful, and deadly. As he moved deeper into the chamber, the lights flickered again, and suddenly, the first pod began to hiss. A low sound followed by a mechanical whir, as if gears were turning inside the very bones of the pod itself. The glass began to fog up from the inside, and slowly a figure began to stir. Evan froze, his breath catching in his throat. The soldier inside the pod was waking up. It was a chilling sight. The soldier's eyes flickered open, glowing faintly with an eerie blue light. The soldier's muscles rippled beneath his skin, like an animal preparing to pounce. He wasn't human anymore. Not fully. His face was a perfect blend of humanity and something far more intimidating. The soldier looked around as though searching for a threat, but saw nothing. The room was empty, save for Evan. The pod hissed again, and more soldiers began to awaken. Evan stepped back, his mind racing with questions. What were these beings? Why have they been created? As the soldiers slowly rose from their pods, each one seemed to have the same purpose: waiting. Their eyes flickered with a cold, mechanical focus as if they were programmed for a single mission: to protect Earth at all costs. But what did that mean now? The world was in ruins, humanity was gone, and there was no one left to defend. They were in a world that no longer made sense to them. Evan couldn't help but feel both a sense of relief and terror. He had been alone for so long, wandering a dying world with no answers. Now, standing in front of these super soldiers, he realized that his isolation was not an accident. It was part of something bigger. These soldiers had been designed for a world that no longer existed. They had no purpose now, but what would happen when they discovered that humanity was gone? Would they see him as an ally, or a remnant of a world they had been created to protect? As he observed them, he could almost feel their confusion. Their programming was still intact, but their mission no longer had a clear target. They were warriors without a war. Suddenly, one of the soldiers took a step forward, its movements graceful and precise, almost predatory. Even didn't know whether to run or stand his ground. The soldier's head tilted, as if studying him, its glowing eyes scanning him up and down. Even felt a chill run down his spine. It was as though the soldier could see right through him, analyzing his very existence. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. The soldier wasn't human, not in the way he had understood humanity. It was something else entirely, a perfect creation built to carry out its purpose. Then, without warning, the soldier raised its hand and even flinched, expecting an attack. But instead of striking, the soldier spoke. Its voice was deep and mechanical, yet carried an eerie calm. Designation: Unit 23. The word sent a shock through Evan's body. It was like the soldier was identifying itself, asserting its existence in the only way it knew how. Unit 23, the soldier had said. Evan wondered how many more there were, how many more soldiers had awakened. Before Evan could respond, another soldier, standing beside Unit 23, spoke in the same mechanical tone. Mission parameters: protect Earth. There it was again. The same line, the same cold, calculated words. These soldiers were still programmed to defend Earth, yet Earth no longer needed defending. There were no enemies to fight, no human civilization left to protect. But did they know that? Could they understand that their purpose had been rendered obsolete by time and circumstance? Evan couldn't help but feel both a strange comfort and a deep unease. These soldiers were the last vestige of humanity's fight for survival, a testament to what humans had once been capable of. They had been created to fight, to protect, to never give up. But now, with no one left to protect, their existence was a cruel irony. They had no purpose anymore, and their programming would eventually turn them into ghosts, soulless beings wandering the world without a clear directive. But what would happen when they discovered that there was nothing left to fight for? As more soldiers stirred from their pods, Evan knew one thing for sure. This moment was the beginning of something new. The super soldiers would awaken to face a world that no longer made sense. Would they search for answers? Would they adapt to the new reality? Or would they simply carry out their mission without question, endlessly searching for an enemy that no longer existed? Whatever the answer, Evan had no idea what the future held, but he knew one thing. The world as he knew it was about to change forever. The soldiers stood, silent and still, awaiting their next command. And Evan, the last human, was left to wonder if these perfect creations could find a new purpose, or if they would ultimately become the last tragic remnants of a civilization that had already faded into history. The atmosphere in the facility grew tense as more of the super soldiers began to rise from their pods. Each movement was synchronized, almost as if they had been trained to awaken at the same time. Their glowing eyes flickered, scanning the room methodically, seeking out any sign of danger. The sound of their metallic footsteps echoed off the walls as they began to stand tall, their bodies now fully alive and alert. Evan stood motionless, his heart racing in his chest. He had never imagined that this would happen. For so long, he had lived alone, wandering the desolate remains of Earth, never knowing that these beings, these soldiers, had been hidden in the depths of the planet, waiting for the right moment to rise. The hum that had once seemed so distant now reverberated through his very bones, and he could feel the weight of their presence pressing down on him. As the last of the super soldiers emerged from their pods, the room seemed to fill with an energy that was almost palpable. The soldiers were silent for a moment, as if they were waiting for something to happen, for a signal to move. The eerie stillness of the room was broken only by the low growl of machinery and the soft sound of air circulating through the facility. Evan's mind raced. What were they waiting for? What would they do now that they had awoken? It was clear to him that these soldiers were not like any humans he had ever known. They were something different, something more. Their bodies were built for combat, for survival, for protection. Their minds, however, were locked in a past they could not remember. They were not aware of what had happened to the world outside the facility. They didn't know that humanity had fallen, that Earth was no longer the planet they had once known. One of the soldiers, standing at the front, stepped forward. His movements were fluid, graceful, and deadly, like a predator stalking its prey. His eyes locked onto Even, and for a moment, the two of them stood frozen, staring at each other. There was no fear in the soldier's gaze, only cold calculation. It was as though he could sense that Even was different, that he was not an enemy, but something new, something unexpected. Designation: Alpha 7. The soldier's voice was calm, mechanical, but there was an unmistakable authority behind it. Alpha 7 stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Evan's. Mission parameters: protect Earth. Even swallowed hard, his throat dry. He knew that these soldiers had been created to fight, to defend. But what did that mean now? Who were they supposed to protect, now that everyone was gone? Earth was no longer the vibrant, living world it had once been. It was a wasteland. The cities were empty, the forests were silent, and the oceans had all but dried up. There was no one left to protect. As Alpha 7 took another step forward, Even instinctively took a step back. His mind was racing, trying to come up with an explanation, some way to communicate with them, to make them understand. But how could he? These soldiers had been designed for one purpose, and that purpose no longer existed. Before Even could speak, another soldier, this one taller and more imposing, moved past Alpha 7. His armor gleamed in the dim light, reflecting a faint blue glow. He didn't seem to acknowledge Even at first, but then he turned his head, his eyes locking onto him. Designation: Bravo 5. The voice was cold, emotionless. It sent a chill down Even's spine. Mission parameters: secure and defend the planet. Even's breath caught in his throat. They were programmed to defend, but who were they supposed to defend Earth from? There was nothing left but ruins, dust, and silence. Was it possible that they didn't realize humanity was gone? The soldiers seemed to be assessing their surroundings, their eyes scanning the empty halls, the crumbling walls, and the long-forgotten technology that surrounded them. They didn't react to the decaying state of the facility. It was as though they were oblivious to the passage of time. All they knew was their mission: to protect Earth, no matter what. But then, something strange happened. One of the soldiers, a smaller unit designated as Charlie 3, paused. His head tilted slightly, as if something was bothering him. He scanned the area again, but this time, his eyes lingered on Even. A moment of silence passed before Charlie 3's voice broke through the stillness. Human life, extinct. The question was simple, but it shook Even to his core. How could they know? Had they been dormant long enough to sense the absence of humanity? Even hesitated, unsure of how to respond. He had never imagined that these soldiers, designed to protect humanity, would be aware of the truth. But now that they were awake, there was no avoiding it. He stepped forward, his voice trembling as he spoke. "Yes," he said quietly, "humanity is gone. There's no one left. You were meant to protect us, but we're gone. Earth is dying. There's no war left to fight." The soldiers stood silent for a long moment. Alpha 7, who had been leading the group, tilted his head, his expression unreadable. Bravo 5 and the others remained still, processing Evan's words. It was clear that they were struggling to understand. But Even could see something behind their eyes, a flicker of recognition, a hesitation. It was as though their programming was clashing with the reality they were now facing. They were built to protect Earth, but how could they protect a planet that no longer had a need for protection? Alpha 7's voice broke the silence again. Mission parameters: unclear. It was the first time Evan had heard uncertainty in the voice of one of these soldiers. It made him realize just how complex the situation was. These soldiers had been created to fight for a world that was no longer there. Their purpose, their very existence, had become meaningless in a world that no longer needed saving. As the soldiers stood in silence, Even realized that Earth was facing a new kind of conflict, one that no one had ever anticipated. The super soldiers had awoken, but their purpose was now a mystery, even to them. Would they adapt to this new reality, or would they remain trapped in their programming, searching for a purpose that no longer existed? Even didn't know the answer, but he knew one thing for certain. The awakening of these super soldiers would change everything. The world was no longer just an empty wasteland. It was now the stage for something far greater, something even couldn't yet fully comprehend. But he would have to figure it out. The fate of Earth, and the soldiers who were meant to protect it, was now in his hands. The tension in the air thickened as the super soldiers stood motionless, their expressions unreadable. Alpha 7, Bravo 5, and the others seemed to process Evan's words, their enhanced minds struggling to reconcile the concept of a world without humanity, a world that no longer needed protection. Evan felt a strange mixture of fear and responsibility settling in his chest. These soldiers were powerful, capable of wiping out any threats, but they were now caught in an existential crisis. What were they supposed to do now? Evan took a cautious step forward, trying to make himself visible, trying to show that he was not an enemy. You were created to protect us, but there's no one left to protect. Humanity is gone. Earth is no longer what it once was. For a moment, the soldiers were silent, and Evan couldn't help but wonder if they were simply waiting for new orders, orders that would never come. The emptiness in their eyes made him feel the weight of the situation. He had expected them to be machines of war, ready to fight, ready to protect. But now that the need for protection had disappeared, he wasn't sure what they would become. The room seemed to grow colder, and Evan felt the weight of the soldiers' gaze on him. As the minutes passed, it became clear that these soldiers were processing the situation. Their programming, designed to respond to a specific threat, was now confused by the absence of humanity. How could they be protectors when there was no one left to protect? Alpha 7 was the first to move. He turned sharply, his movements precise and controlled, and walked toward a terminal in the far corner of the room. The others followed his lead, like a unit trained for a mission that had never been completed. The sound of their footsteps echoed through the silent facility, and Evan realized that he was witnessing the unfolding of something unprecedented. Status: Earth abandoned, humanity extinct. Alpha 7 spoke in his deep, emotionless voice as he studied the terminal. His words, though simple, carried an air of finality. It was clear that the soldier was confirming what Evan had told him. Humanity was no more, and Earth was nothing but a shell of what it used to be. Evan's heart sank. He had expected the soldiers to be confused, but hearing the cold truth reflected back at him felt like a blow. For a moment, he felt the crushing weight of loneliness, realizing that the super soldiers were the last link to a civilization that no longer existed. But then, something changed. Bravo 5, who had remained quiet until now, spoke. Purpose: protect. No threat detected. His voice was calm, but Evan could hear the uncertainty beneath the surface. There was a deep conflict in the soldiers' programming. They had been created for a singular purpose: to defend, to fight, to protect. But there was nothing left to protect. Earth was empty, and the threat of war was nowhere to be found. Evan's mind raced as he considered their next move. He had no answers to give them, no new mission to offer. He had no way of reprogramming them or telling them to stop searching for a war that no longer existed. They had been born to protect, and that was all they knew. But in a world without threats, what was their purpose now? The silence grew longer as the soldiers seemed to come to a collective realization. Their mission was incomplete, but not by their fault. They had been created for a world that no longer existed. In their minds, there was only one question left: what now? Evan couldn't help but feel sympathy for them. They were powerful, capable beings, But now they were trapped by their own design. They had been created to fight, but there was no enemy. They had no purpose, and that made them vulnerable in ways that Even had never anticipated. Finally, Alpha 7 turned back to face Even. His glowing eyes flickered as if he was weighing the words carefully. Mission parameters: protect. No threat. No enemy. What now? Even could see the struggle in the soldier's expression, the programming that once made him a weapon now conflicting with the reality of the empty world they had woken up in. There was a strange sense of melancholy in the air, as if the soldiers had lost their identity. They had been made to serve, but now they were lost, just as much as Evan himself was. Even swallowed hard. "I don't know," he said quietly. "I don't know what comes next. Maybe you were created to protect Earth from enemies, but perhaps now you have to protect it from itself." The soldiers looked at him, their glowing eyes cold but now filled with something unfamiliar. Curiosity, perhaps. Could they change? Could they adapt? The truth was, Even didn't know. All he knew was that the soldiers were no longer part of the past. They were now part of a new reality, one that none of them fully understood. As Even stood there, surrounded by these silent, powerful beings, he realized that he was facing a choice. The soldiers had awakened, but it was now up to him to decide what their future would look like. Would they continue their mission, endlessly searching for a war that no longer existed? Or would they learn to live in a world where there was no need for war, no need for protection? For the first time since humanity's fall, Even felt a spark of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, these soldiers could find a new purpose, one that didn't involve destruction. They had been born from humanity's need for survival, but now, in the absence of that need, there was a chance for rebirth. But it would not be easy. The soldiers were powerful, but their strength was no longer enough to guarantee success. They would need to change, to adapt, just as Earth itself would have to adapt to the new reality. Even wasn't sure what that would look like, but he knew that he would have to guide them. Because, in the end, it wasn't just Earth that needed protection now. It was the future. And the future, it seemed, was in their hands. As Evan continued to stand before the super soldiers, the weight of their collective gaze pressed down on him, and the uncertainty in the air seemed to deepen. The soldiers were made for war, designed to fight, to protect, and yet here they stood in an empty world, their purpose nullified. For the first time, the power of their presence no longer felt like a shield. It felt like an enormous responsibility, one that Even wasn't sure he was ready to bear. The soldiers' glowing eyes shifted between each other, and Even noticed something he hadn't before, a hint of confusion, almost as if they were beginning to process their own existence in this new world. The rigid, mechanical nature of their programming was starting to crack, giving way to something more human, more self-aware. They were realizing that they had been abandoned by their creators, left to face a planet that no longer needed saving. For a moment, the room fell into a silence so deep it felt suffocating. The only sound was the distant hum of the facility's old generators and the soft echoes of their footsteps. Even could almost hear the wheels turning in their enhanced minds, processing the knowledge they had just received. It was as though they were slowly realizing that they had been part of a larger, forgotten story, a story that had ended before they even had a chance to begin. The tension broke when Bravo 5 stepped forward, his massive frame towering over Even. The soldier's eyes, cold and calculating, were now searching Evan's face, as though trying to gauge his intentions. Uncertainty, in mission. No threat. No directive. What now, human? Bravo 5's voice was flat, but the question lingered in the air like a puzzle that needed solving. Even swallowed, struggling to keep his composure. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about adapting to a new world, a world where everything had changed. The super soldiers, once ruthless instruments of war, were now facing an entirely different challenge. Finding meaning in a world that had no place for them. The question Bravo 5 posed wasn't just about what they would do. It was about what he, as the last remaining human, would do. What could he offer these warriors who had no mission? How could they coexist in a world that was no longer their battlefield? "I don't have all the answers," Ivan replied, his voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of hesitation. "But maybe the question is, what can we rebuild? The war is over. There's nothing left to fight. But maybe we can help this world heal." The soldiers stood still, their expressions unreadable. It was clear that they were processing his words. Rebuild. Help Earth heal. Those were concepts that didn't fit into their programming. Their creators had designed them to fight, to destroy, to defend. The idea of protecting something that no longer needed protection was foreign to them. For a moment, Ivan thought they might simply return to their original directive, continue searching for some unseen enemy. But as he looked into their eyes, those artificial eyes that once reflected nothing but cold efficiency, he saw something new. There was a flicker of understanding, something that told him they were beginning to question their very existence, just as he had. Alpha 7, who had been silent for the longest time, suddenly spoke. His voice was calm, measured, but there was a depth to it that hadn't been there before. Healing, rebuilding, new mission. The words hung in the air, and Ivan felt a glimmer of hope stir in his chest. Could it be? Could these soldiers, designed for nothing but war, actually shift their focus to something more constructive? He didn't know, but the possibility seemed to grow stronger with every passing moment. The soldiers stood in a circle now, a strange unity forming between them and Ivan. Alpha 7 turned to face his comrades, his glowing eyes flickering as if making a decision. New directive, unknown. Mission parameters unclear. It was clear that their programming was struggling to adjust, and yet there was a spark of something else within them, something more than what they had been designed for. They had been born for battle, but now, in the face of nothing to fight against, perhaps they could find something new, a new purpose, a new role in the world. Ivan took a deep breath, his heart still racing, but his mind now clear. The soldiers may have been built for war, but they were beginning to realize that this was no longer their place. He wasn't sure if they would follow his lead, or if they would continue searching for an enemy that wasn't there, but one thing was certain. The future of Earth, and of these soldiers, depended on the choices they made together. Turning toward Alpha 7, Ivan spoke again, his voice full of determination. "You've been trained to fight, but there's something more you can do. Earth may be broken, but we can rebuild it. Not with weapons, but with the strength of our will." Alpha 7's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, there was a glimmer of something in them, an emotion that wasn't programmed into him. It was a question, a challenge. Could they really rebuild? Could they start over, even when everything they had known was gone? As the super soldiers gathered around Ivan, their massive forms imposing yet somehow not threatening, he felt the weight of the moment settle in. The soldiers were no longer mindless instruments of destruction. They were, for the first time, a reflection of humanity's will to survive, not through force, but through adaptation, through growth. Together, they would have to find a new path forward. The soldiers' programming had been built to protect Earth, but they had never been given the chance to protect something different, the future. And perhaps, just perhaps, they were ready to embrace that challenge. The silence that followed was filled with unspoken understanding. Ivan knew that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The soldiers had awoken, and now they were about to embark on a new mission, one that would reshape the future of Earth and perhaps the universe itself. The next few days were filled with the strange, unsettling rhythm of the new world. Ivan watched the super soldiers carefully, their towering forms moving with precision as they scanned the remnants of Earth. They were still adjusting, still trying to comprehend the nature of their new mission. But what surprised Ivan the most was that, despite their overwhelming strength and advanced weaponry, they were also learning. They were adapting to the world around them, just as he was. At first, the soldiers seemed to drift in a kind of mechanical limbo. They would gather around the remains of human cities, scanning through the debris, analyzing data and trying to understand what had happened to the Earth. It wasn't quite the mission they had been made for, but it was the one they had been given. Each day, they seemed to discover something new, something that led them further away from their old purpose and closer to the reality of a world that needed rebuilding, not destroying. Even couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility as he watched them. The soldiers were powerful, unquestionably so, but they were also lost. They had been built to protect and fight, and yet there was no war left to fight. Humanity was gone, and now the planet itself needed protection. But from what? From itself. From the consequences of the wars that had led to humanity's downfall. One day, Alpha 7 approached Even with a data pad in hand, his face unreadable, but there was a slight tilt to his head, a sign of curiosity. He held the pad out to Even, and on the screen was an image of a ruined city. It was Earth, yes, but it looked so different. The buildings were shattered, the streets empty. Nature was slowly creeping back, vines and trees growing where human civilization had once thrived. Yet, in the midst of this beauty, there was a sense of loss, of something irreplaceable. Even took the pad and studied it. "What is this?" he asked softly. "Data gathered. Life signs. None." Alpha 7's voice was steady, but Even could hear the faintest tinge of something in his tone, perhaps a hint of frustration. "We have found no evidence of any remaining humans." Even nodded slowly, his heart heavy. "I know. There's no one left. But we can still make this world ours. We can still build something new. Maybe it won't be the same as before, but it will be ours." For a brief moment, Alpha 7 stood still, his glowing eyes studying Even with an intensity that almost made him feel as if he were being assessed. Then, in a move that surprised Even, the super soldier turned to face the other soldiers, giving them a silent order. The group immediately began moving, dispersing to continue their task of scanning the planet. Even looked down at the data pad again. He wasn't sure if the soldiers truly understood what he was saying, but he could feel a change in the air. They were learning. They were beginning to grasp that the old world was gone, and that a new one could be forged, even without the humans who had once ruled it. Days turned into weeks, and the soldiers began to shift their focus. Their mission, once so singular and focused on protection through violence, was now expanding. Alpha 7 and Bravo 5 took the lead, working to catalog Earth's remaining resources, establishing safe zones where the environment had become unstable, and even planting new crops in areas that were once ravaged by war. Slowly, the soldiers' military structure became less about defense and more about preservation. Even, in the meantime, started to work alongside them. Though he didn't have the strength or the power of the super soldiers, his knowledge of Earth's history and biology became invaluable. He helped them understand how to grow food, how to manage the few resources that remained, and how to safeguard the planet's fragile ecosystems. It wasn't easy. The planet was still struggling to recover from centuries of warfare and environmental destruction. But as time passed, the super soldiers began to integrate into this new mission. They weren't just warriors anymore. They were caretakers of the Earth. Even started to see small changes in them, subtle shifts that indicated they were not just learning about the world, but about themselves. One evening, as the sun set behind the broken remains of the city skyline, Even sat on a rock, gazing at the horizon. He watched as Alpha 7 and Bravo 5 worked together to repair an old water system, their movements synchronized, efficient. It was a far cry from the mindless warriors they had once been, and yet, in that moment, Even couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. They were learning. They were changing. Alpha 7 approached him then, his steps heavy but purposeful. "Even," he said, his voice as cold and distant as ever, but with a new quality. There was a question in it. Purpose complete. Even turned to face him, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. He wasn't sure if the soldier fully understood the weight of the question he was asking, but he could see the effort in Alpha 7's posture. The soldier had come a long way from the cold, detached weapon of war he once was. "I don't think any of us ever really have a complete purpose," Even said softly, standing up to face the soldier. "But we can make something new. Something worth protecting. Something that matters." Alpha 7's eyes flickered, processing the words. After a long pause, he nodded, though it was a subtle, almost imperceptible movement. The super soldier didn't speak, but there was something different in the way he stood, something that hinted at understanding. "We will protect this." The words were simple, but they held an incredible weight. The soldiers had found a new purpose, one that wasn't based on destruction or violence, but on something much greater: preservation. They were no longer just machines of war. They were the guardians of Earth's future. And as Evan stood alongside them, he realized that the Earth, though scarred, still had a chance. The soldiers had awakened, and so had the possibility of a new dawn. Together, they would rebuild. Together, they would protect this world. And together, they would find their place in it, forever changed, forever united by the bond they had forged in the ashes of the old world.